Thanks for coming out today. I hope everybody had a great time at the Governor's News Conference. But in the Senate, again, we're focused on jobs, education, the budget. What you saw this week was really evidence of our focus. We passed out three important workers' comp bills. One of those had broad support, and that everybody's wondering, how is this process going to work? Well, we showed it can work. In a very tough bill, we were able to get 30 votes. There was, 7 Democrats on that bill. So I think that sends a great message to the House that this is an issue that's important to Washington. It's important to our workers. It's important to our employers. We're number one in costs, and we can't be there if we're going to be competitive in a very fluid work environment, and where employers have choices as far as where they want to go. And then our other focus this week is kind of shifting to the education end. We have several bills coming out of committee. Senator Danmeyer will talk about a couple of those, and then next week we will be passing those off of the floor.
So the House is eager to pass your bill, so message received from the House perspective. We would like to get those worker comp bills out and on the governor's desk as soon as possible. We've been focused in on education. We brought Representative Dahlquist, who's going to talk about our education reform ideas. We also have put together a package of a group that Representative Kretz has been heading up, working on the school safety issues. And we have a transportation group that's bringing a reform package of ideas that we think can be put into effect instead of a revenue package, and we'll have that ready for you guys for the next media availability, hopefully. And so we've been focused in on mostly the committees are in full swing. There's a lot of good bill, bad bill, but we're trying to make sure that we are working with all the parties concerned, trying to make the best possible legislation. Nothing's been really cantankerous in the House yet. I think that is starting to come, and we're seeing a lot more divisive type bills. We're watching the politics in Olympia right now. Is probably one of the most interesting things, trying to understand what bills are being moved and why. We've seen some which are typically Republican bills getting bipartisan support. I think that's because of the coalition and the ability to get those through the body. And we also have seen some bills that I just think we need to give a thorough examination to and get an understanding of what the politics behind those bills are and why they're bringing them forward at this time. And I think, again, it points to the coalition. So we'll get a chance to explore that in the near future. So from our perspective, as we talk about education, we are putting on an education first budget, so we will be doing that. And Kathy, you want to talk about that?
I certainly can. As you know, it's been a priority of ours, the House Republican Caucus, to make sure that we funded education first and separately. And we did that before drafting the rest of the general operating budget. So we will move forward with that. The framework for that will be the 2 House bills that were cited in the McCleary case, so 2776 and 2261, which give us the framework. We will not be adding other programs to that. It just enlarges the price tag. And right now, considering we have $1 billion shortfall, we're willing to make a large investment, but we also want to make sure that we have different outcomes. It's not just about more money into the same system. It's about making sure we're improving student outcomes along the way.
Do you want to?
Sure, so I'll follow up on that. One of the things, the McCleary decision obviously in the funding has been very significant and is going to dominate this session. That's going to work itself out. One of the important lines in the McCleary decision, Judge Stevens wrote that it's not just about money, that there's got to be reforms that bring about outcomes for students. And we've got several bills working through the Senate Early Learning and K-12 Committee that are focused specifically on that. Are we going to get a different outcome for students? We've got the 3rd grade reading bill, which is also moving in the House. Representative Dahlquist and I worked on that a lot over the summer. And that's all about particularly targeting the students of color and poverty who have been part of the achievement or the opportunity gap that we've seen, this persistent gap in performance that we've seen in the education for those kids. This bill is specifically targeted at providing additional strong supports from preschool through 4th grade to make sure those students have a fair shot at a solid education, that they have the same opportunity that every other student has. Another bill, and that bill right now, I expect that it will move out of the Early Learning and K-12 committee this afternoon. We've been doing a lot of work engaging stakeholders and interest groups and reaching across the aisle. We've got a proposed substitute that I think addresses a lot of the concerns that were raised in the hearing, so we're excited to move that bill forward. We also have one that I think is an example of a common sense parent bill, and that's the grading bill. When we talk about the achievement index, it is something that even as someone who's involved in education on a daily basis, I've got to go look up all the words, what it means, how do I interpret that? And we said that doesn't make sense. If it's hard for us, it's very difficult and almost impenetrable for parents. So that's why we're going to go to an A, B, C, D, F scale. It makes sense. People understand it. Let's demystify education. The more we can get parents connected, I think the better outcomes we're going to have for students.
Yep.
Am I interrupting?
No, I just thought I saw a hand over here, so I was going over there. Go ahead, John.
Oh, okay. To education spearheads, is that sort of multiple part McCleary thing? Is the House and the Senate proposals to meet with McCleary, or is it pretty much the same proposal? Also, I've heard rumors that the Republican side might go as little as $500 million on the allocations to meet McCleary, and wanted to see if there was anything to that. And I think you already partly answered my question. It sounds like you're going with when I was going to the Joint Education Task Force meetings, I had two radically different approaches to meeting McCleary, and it sounds like you're going with the minimalist one. So I want to throw all that at you.
So I would say that while we're communicating, we're not, that there will be potentially different approaches taken in the House and in the Senate. And I would say, speaking a little bit for the Senate, there's several pathways that you can take to reach McCleary. And I would say at this point, we're not committed to any particular pathway, but exploring all of them as we move forward. And that's why there's such a focus on making sure that the money that we commit, particularly into early learning, into the all-day K pieces, into the K3 pieces, all that money, that we're getting outcomes for kids. That's what the focus has to be, is if we're going to invest significant money, what is going to be the benefit for students?
Okay, I guess I'm trying to pin you down on the Republican side during the talks last November and December had about a $900 million price tag. Is that still the current price
So
tag?
one of the things, John, I think that you're missing is when we did the budget in the past, our education budget has always been, I think the House Republicans has been the strongest. It was, and when we ran our own budget last time, clearly we were ahead of everybody else. The thing, though, that I think that you're missing is some of the subtleties. You know, right now, the House Democrats believe that Apple Health, and dentistry, and optometry is part of basic education. So in that perspective, yeah, we're not spending the same amount of money as them, because that's not what McCleary talked about. So it's exactly what he's saying is we're still working on trying to figure out what the definition is. Did you want to add?
And absolutely. So I did serve on the task force as an alternate member, and you're right. The price tag that we came up with at that time, if you fully funded 2261 and 2776, was close to $1 billion. But part of the pieces that we don't agree with is the prioritization of how we spend that money. We believe investing in early learning is a priority because it is about student outcomes. And I think that the House and the Senate and our caucuses are working very hard together to make sure that we achieve that. Hence why Senator Dammeier just spoke about the third grade accountability intervention bill that goes directly to literacy for our poorest minority students. And that's what we're trying to do.
It's really changing the conversation, from always about inputs, how much money do we want to dump into a system before we actually reform it. A great example of that was in California when they spent billions of dollars on class size and they didn't have the teachers for that. It was a disaster. So, I mean, our whole focus has been on what outcomes do we want, what proven evidence-based programs do we have to get there. And too often what you see in education today is it's this Hail Mary. If we just throw more money at this, we're going to get this great result. We've just shown that doesn't work. I mean, over the last 8 years, we've seen a 29% increase in educational spending. And where are we? We're flat on graduation rates, and we're falling behind on the opportunity gap. And we don't want to come back to parents, students, and others saying, well, we failed you for another 8 years because all we did was put more money into the system. It's not about money. If you look at McCleary, and the case prior to that, which was the Duran decision, it's never been just about dollars. It's about a program of education. It's about student outputs, and that's what we're focused on. How can we move the needle so that we're getting kids the kind of education that they're going to need to compete in a very tough, competitive world?
And
I have a
I'm
question.
trying to pin you down
Hold
on
on.
whether you're going with 900 million or
Oh,
whether.
wait, so time out. Go ahead, Rachel.
This is a non-education
Okay, great.
question, sorry. It's for both yourself and Senator Tom. Governor Inslee at his press avail called for moving quickly on Medicaid expansion. He
Right.
said once you guys looked at the numbers, you'd be on board with this. What's your reaction to that?
So ours is simple in the House. We aren't opposed to the idea. It's something that we have to explore.
I'm sorry, you said you aren't.
We are not opposed to the idea. We want to make sure, though, that if we do this, that we make sure it's anchored in that if the feds back out of the program, which they've been known to do, that we're not on the hook for this and that we can put some safeguards around it. And so that's been our plan all along.
And that's where we are in the Senate. You know, we're looking at this very carefully. If you look at, you know, what's going to happen in D.C., to think that, you know, we know we're going from a 100% match and then to a 90-10, they're broke. And when you're broke, you have to start, you know, make real cutbacks. And the fallback traditionally at the federal level has been 50-50. Well, the program doesn't work at a 50-50. So we need to make sure that we're not encapsulating ourselves into a program we can't afford, especially in light of McCleary, when that is our paramount duty, is to move education forward. The other thing that we're focused on related to that is the exchange and making sure that right now it seems to be a feeding frenzy. Oh, the feds are paying for it, and since somebody else is paying for it, there's no cost containment in it.
Right.
Well, pretty soon, in 2 years, that's on our nickel. And having this, you know, this is my 11th year down here. 2 years goes pretty fast. And the next thing you know, we're going to be paying for this. While the rates that they're at now, the original proposal, I think, was for 2%, which is about $25 million. You know, they're at a cost structure now that's $50 million. That is unsustainable. It's unattainable. And we need to make sure that we have a handle around those kind of cost factors going out when the state then does have to pick up those
So it sounds like
dollars.
you're questioning whether the state should expand Medicaid.
Well,
under the
we,
national
you know, if
law.
we're going to go that direction, we need to do it in a measured way so that it does not create an entitlement. So if the feds do pull back, you know, we
How do
can
you do that?
re-examine. Well, that's what we're trying to explore at this point in time.
We're working in our committee about maybe a trigger mechanism, and that if the program doesn't reach a certain attainment level, then it would kick back.
There's a little bit of a tendency to think this is just a yes or no question. And there are still a whole host of federal rules being written, and there's several decisions that need to be made by the state. Some of which are kind of, once you're in, it's really hard to get out. Some of which we can delay, some of which we can do. So it's about striking the right balance. What should be in the benefits package? Who should it apply to, and all those things. There's room to maneuver. How should we implement it in the most effective way for the state of Washington? And there's different people have different interpretations on that. And I think we're committed to finding the right balance as we go forward.
Is there a timeline? The governor was urging that the legislature move more quickly than more slowly to do this. He wants to book the savings that he says it would bring. So is there a timeline that you guys are thinking about makes sense for this decision?
I think that you have to do it right, and I think doing it right is more important. It's within the 105 days that we're here. We have time to explore it, and I think we should explore it. Any hastened action that would lead to something that is not sustainable doesn't really work. So,
And, obviously it will be, an important component of our budget discussions, but I am not aware of any element that if we passed it tomorrow, we're going to get any more money than we would if we
or
passed it.
any sooner.
Right. So that,
So you do it tandem with the budget, it's not a.
absolutely.
Right.
Correct. And I'm not hearing anywhere where it's vital that we do it in the next 10 days.
I mean,
The governor talked about what he thinks is the wrong direction on a couple issues in the Senate. I wondered if you could address that. One is workers' comp, which you've already addressed a little bit. The other is I-937 and some of the bills that I think Senator Erickson's filed that would recognize hydropower as a greater role in I-937. He seems to think that's not going to work unless you raise up the renewable standard to 80. He mentioned 85, 90% from 20%.
Well, it's interesting, Washington State, I had some business people in here last week, and they were talking that it's funny that Washington State's the only state in the nation that doesn't recognize hydro as a renewable power resource, when, we really are kind of the front runners on that. So Senator Erickson is, looking at that. We're, having those discussions, and that's going to continue to be an ongoing discussion, making sure that, especially as some of these smaller utilities, that they're not being jammed when they don't need new power. Are we forcing them out and saying, well, you have to have idle capacity in your existing power so that you can go out and create this new energy source so that you can meet these demands? A lot of that stuff doesn't make sense, especially in those smaller utilities.
Yeah, and raising those standards, it's mostly about making some of the renewables competitive. Otherwise, they're not. Our approach is that the hydropower is as clean and green as anything else, and moving those standards higher just raises costs on citizens. So, we really feel like the hydro should be part of the portfolio without raising the standards.
Inslee specifically called 937 says a floor, not a ceiling. That the state needs to go far beyond that or beyond that.
I think that the governor's intentions are noble, but the reality is that if we're really going to get people back to work in Washington State, then it's incumbent upon us to provide an environment where business can count on a stable power supply that has a price that's also stable. So we can continue to shoot for the moon, but we have to ask ourselves at what cost and at what jobs cost. So as we move forward, we want to get people back to work. We want to make sure that we take care of the environment, but we want to make sure that we can provide stability for those companies who would be choosing to site here in Washington State.
And outside of Maine, there is no state in the nation with a higher, greener standard of power than we have in Washington State. And so to create an artificial economy on top of our green power to satisfy special interests doesn't really work for me. We need to accept that we are the leaders, and we are 73% green power, and that we do have a system that everybody in the nation is envious of, and they buy our power as that. And it's kind of silly to me that we set ourselves on a back bench and then try to drive up our costs.
I mean, we're not venture capitalists. I mean, we shouldn't be down here picking winners and losers. The best thing that we can do is set a flat table, make sure it's predictable, make sure there's a level playing field, and then let businesses go out and compete and do what they do. And that's what they're asking us. Give us a great education system, give us a higher education system that gives us, the kind of, science majors, math majors, so that they can be involved in those new generation industries. But let the capital markets figure out where to best invest the money. Let us set a flat table and then let them compete instead of us trying to be VCs where we have no business in that business.
Parental notification is going to be heard today. Thoughts from both leaders on that and also on the reproductive parity?
So from my perspective on parental notification, the one thing we need to understand is anytime that you have an elective surgery that is involving a minor, I think the parents should know about a procedure like that. It just only makes sense. And on the reproductive parity, I find the whole thing interesting because adoption is not covered in the Reproductive Parity Act, and neither is insemination and all the other different aspects of birth that you can look at. because it's a mandate on your insurance companies, we don't need anything to drive up the cost of health insurance in the state of Washington. So from that perspective, we're kind of just looking at this as more, it's a political football that they threw out there to see if they could create an untenable working relationship. And I find it's not necessarily the right kind of thing we need. We need people that bring issues that unite us as a state in these tough economic
But it's your
times,
side that
not
raised the
dividing
issue.
issues in tough economic times. Not
It's
in
a
my
Republican,
caucus.
it's a Republican bill.
Reproductive parity?
Oh, I thought we were talking about.
No, we were talking
Well,
about.
he'd asked both.
Right.
And where I'm at on this is, I think we need to have that open discussion. What you haven't seen in Olympia for the last 10 years, and, in our coalition, we have people obviously on both sides of this issue. And what you haven't seen in Olympia is any debate at all as far as parental notification. That bill hasn't been heard in 10 years. And I think that's the crazy part of our politics today, is we so try to control the message that we don't have that open debate. And unless we can have an open debate, you're never going to solve the serious issues that are in front of us. I think the other thing that it does is it points to a direction that I might totally disagree with Senator Padden on this issue, but I will tell you, I think he's one of the most stand-up individuals that you're ever going to find in the legislature. So it gets us away from the personalization, the demonization that is so much a part of the political conversation these days, where we can separate out the issue from the politics, and that's really what we're trying to drive as a coalition. Let's have debate. I think debate is good. Debate is healthy. Let both sides present their case. Let's not try to always bottle things up where only one side gets their message out. Let everybody have that open discussion, and then let's get back again to where our politics are based upon the issues. And once they're based upon the issues, we can have those tough discussions when it comes to the big issues that really matter. And again, that's in jobs, education, and the budget, where people want us focusing our time on.
So you
Rachel?
personally are opposed,
What-
so are you personally opposed to the bill,
To which bill?
the parental notification bill?
Correct. I have not been a supporter of that bill. But again, to me, it's more important about the debate that we're actually willing to have in Olympia and trying to create a culture of politics where it's issue-based and not so divisive. And again, once we have that culture, we can then focus on the things that really matter to the folks here in Washington
Will it
State.
get a floor vote? Do you anticipate it'll get a floor vote?
I mean, the hearing's this afternoon. We haven't even heard what people are going to say about the bill. Let's hear the bill first.
Would you expect that the Parity Act would also get a hearing when it comes over from the House? If it comes over?
Well, I mean, right now, it's scheduled to be heard, in the Senate, so.
When you say there should be an open debate, to be clear, are you saying there should be an open debate on the Senate floor on these issues?
Well, I mean, we're hearing them in committee, and we'll let the committee chairs, we've been pretty non-directive, we'll let the committee chairs make, the decisions as far as what they're hearing in the debate and where they want to go with this, with the legislation.
What you've said in the past is that you don't want socialists to distract from the coalition's priority.
Correct.
But, now you're saying that you think some of these issues do deserve an open debate. Where is the line there in terms of how the coalition stays focused?
Well, I think what it does is, again, it sets the stage that we can have the kind of open discussions and the serious discussions, the adult discussions that we're going to need to have. You look at some of the medical issues that we got to, start talking about as far as when you're talking about preventative care, when you're talking about end-of-life issues. Those are tough discussions that at some point we're going to have. But we need to set the table so that we have a culture in Olympia where we can have that kind of debate. And when the debate has been so bottled up, we haven't had that culture.
And I will tell you, I'll take his deal any day. Try surviving in the House where you can't get a bill through the process when one man stands with the gavel in front of all yours and makes all your political decisions. The fact that he's willing to have debates and open forums in his committees and gives his chairs autonomy. Wouldn't it be great if you could go to your chair and say, you like this bill too, pass it out? We would have had fund education first onto the floor last year. The coalition government that we're creating, as I watch this from the sidelines, seems like one of the more open things that we've seen in a long time.
The governor earlier today said that he doesn't think the legislature should make any more reforms to the workers' compensation system. Somebody said that they're hoping to get it on the governor's desk. He came short of saying he would veto it, but he was clearly not in favor of it. How are you gonna change his mind?
Well, I mean, we're going to change his mind by having employers come down to him and saying, you know, if jobs really was your job number one, we need this bill passed. And that's what we're hearing from our, you know, both our workers and our employers, that if we're going to be competitive as a state, we can't be number one in our cost. States, you know, companies are very fluid today, and especially in the high tech arena, where the governor wants, you know, to kind of move, since it's cleaner, greener. Those companies can move on a snap's notice, and if we're not competitive, there's other states that are, you know, have the welcome mat out for them, and we need to make sure that it's our job number one, that when it comes to business, we are, you know, the state that has the welcome mat out.
Last question?
Don Brunel noted that Utah was ranked, I think, number one for business friendliness by a recent poll, and noted in his blog post that one of the elements of Utah is it's a right-to-work state. Besides workers' compensation costs, to what extent is the union structure, the fact we're not a right-to-work state, a barrier to competing with states like Utah?
You know, one of the things that I think is important to understand is their makeup in their legislature and their political system is much different than ours. You know, we do have a lot of special interest groups that do dominate our politics, so I don't ever see that happening. So it's not really a poignant debate.
Right.
I'd like to shift a little bit. When we talk about early action, we do have some stuff moving that I think is going to be very significant, and I think it goes directly to the coalition's priorities of a stable budget, jobs, and schools. And that is, we've got an early action bill to fund the school construction bonds out of the capital budget, going along with a school safety bill that talks about some of the things that we can do to shave seconds off response time, to get our law enforcement, in the case of some sort of serious threat, that we can get them to our schools more quickly, and that we can make it harder to get to our students by anybody who wants to do them harm. These are bills that have, the school safety bill was passed out unanimously out of the Early Learning and K-12 committee the other day. Both those bills, the bond bill has been heard in the Ways and Means Committee. The school safety bill will be heard there today, and we expect to move those out. I mean, those are important things. At a time, we're going to have a whole series of schools that are, including in my district, they're going to be running construction bonds next Tuesday. Strong schools make strong communities. This is about moving that forward. I would hope that this is something that everybody, regardless of their politics, could agree is a good thing to do. We have a chance to move out, to start school construction early, to address some school safety, and that'll put some people to work. It's a win-win-win.
We gotta go. We have 1 o'clock.
When are you gonna have them on the floor?
Monday.